Right, do take a seat. And
I think a couple of people might be missing.
oh, okay. There's always people coming late. Unitarian traditional, isn't it?
Is there anyone who doesn't have a pack who would like one? I think we're getting to the point people might have to share, actually. Let me just check. Your turn. Okay, there's one more, thank you. Did you have spare printouts of the presentations?
Sorry?
I think there's somebody missing a printout if you've got an extra one of the presentation.
We'll worry about that later. These are all your ones, are they? They're not? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Right, we'll worry about that at lunchtime, etc. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. We are really, really pleased to be able to do this training. The first thing I'm going to do, in case I forget later, is to thank the Media Trust for not Media Trust. Sorry, I've just run. I'm just going to. Sorry, I'm too.
I think we've just run out of packs. I don't know if there's someone you could share with. I think James has some.
I'll
spare
do that in a
printouts
second.
that he
Sorry,
can.
sure.
I think James might have
Right.
some spare
Okay.
printouts that he can. You've got it. Okay.
Right. Sorry. The first thing I'd like to do is thank the Hibbert Trust. They have sponsored today by a huge amount, and we are extremely grateful for that. And it would not have happened without them. And also some money has come from the Visibility Strategy Group. But I have some influence on that as I chair it, so we won't talk about that. I'll let Fiona really introduce herself, but just a few domestics. We have lunch, which is part of your fee that you have paid or haven't paid, at 1 o'clock. If at any time you want teas and coffees, then it's freely available actually in the restaurant, and the toilets are just at the top of the stairs if you don't know that. If you need to wander out, then just wander out and stretch your legs. But we will be having a coffee break at about sort of 11:15, something like that. Any questions? Just let either of us know which you want to do. We are streaming this as part of the deal with the Hibbert Trust. They wanted us to stream it, and then we're making a little film, which means it's a sort of usable resource afterwards. But thank you. I shall hand over to Fiona, who will do all her introductions. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. I've seen some of you around the building, but nice to actually be able to introduce myself formally. My name's Fiona Lewis, and I'm here on behalf of the Media Trust, which is a charity that helps other charities and not-for-profits to communicate and get their messages out. So my background is in communications at charities. So my last full-time job was at a charity called the National Literacy Trust. But since working there, I work as a freelance consultant. And can you all hear me, by the way? Just checking. Yeah, great. And I do training for people like yourselves. So I usually work with smaller groups, actually, usually about 10 people. But we've got a huge crowd today, which is great. It does mean that some of the exercises we're going to do later on might take a little bit longer, or we might not be able to be quite as interactive, but hopefully we'll manage. So as James said, today what we're going to do is for about the first hour till the coffee break, I think I'm being filmed. And so that will be, hopefully it won't feel like a lecture, but it will be very much me talking to you. Whereas after the coffee break and after lunch, what I want to do is get you thinking a bit more and get you doing some exercises which will hopefully move you along. So, James, if you could click the PowerPoint presentation, please. So, yeah, if you could go on a couple, actually. So what we're going to talk about today. So firstly, what is outreach or communications, and why bother? Is it something that you actually want to do? Secondly, what content and tactics do you need to make that happen? What's the activity that is going to help you get your message out there? And thirdly, we're going to look at working with the media and how you can get coverage in the media, because that can be quite a daunting thing to some people. So before we get started, I just had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. Firstly, who has experience of doing communications and working with the media? Could I have a show of hands? Oh, okay, so lots of experience. And would you consider yourselves amateurs or experts or somewhere in between the two?
Amateurs.
Amateurs, okay. That's good, because if you're experts, you could be lecturing me, couldn't you? Enthusiastic, good. Well, we like enthusiasm, so that's really good. And the second question that I had, which sprung to mind when I was chatting with a lady over breakfast, how did you come to Unitarianism? And obviously you can't all answer that, but if a few people want to put their hands up and tell me how you heard about Unitarianism and first got involved. Yeah.
Join the youth club.
Join the youth club, okay.
Saw an advert in Open Sesame, the OU.
Yes.
Magazine.
Okay.
One of the national newspapers doing visiting various denominations, and Rosebery or somewhere like that.
Okay. Okay, brilliant.
Was asked to be the organist.
Okay.
My closest friend at school was from a Unitarian family.
Okay, brilliant.
My friend in America kept sending me articles about CUUP cups over there, and it was interesting. And I find out about them, and I find out about Unitarian Universalists.
Yes.
And I thought, I wonder if there's any here.
Okay.
I just searched around.
So a friend's recommendation as well. Okay, great. So actually we've got quite a broad range of things there. So there's been PR or coverage in a newspaper, adverts, outreach activities like the youth group, and also word of mouth through friends. Is there anything completely different to that?
I was looking for support after a bereavement.
Okay, so something, issue in your life actually drove you to seek it out. That's interesting.
I happened to pass the church in the city centre.
Okay, okay, so it was kind of the shop front, if you like.
I attended a memorial service for a close friend and was amazed at how inclusive the was.
Okay, brilliant, thank you.
I got involved peripherally in the late 1970s through a group that was being run by Golders Green.
Okay,
And there I met the minister at Kensington Unitarians.
yeah.
And eventually I joined that congregation when I moved to that part of London.
Okay, brilliant. So a huge variety, and actually, you know, that in some ways that's your strategy there, isn't it? Like looking at how you came to Unitarianism and what was the spark that pushed you in the direction, and trying to think about how you might use those same motivators. Okay, so thank you, James. So first of all, as I said at the beginning, I think in terms of outreach, communications, whatever you want to call it, the first question is, do you actually want to do it? Should you bother with it? I don't know very much about Unitarianism. It's fairly new to me. One of the concepts that was expressed to me was this idea that Unitarians don't evangelise. I don't know if you would agree with that sentiment or not. Okay, good. Because you're absolutely the experts on Unitarianism today. So would it be true to say that there's something in the very nature of Unitarianism that actually makes it quite difficult to communicate or do PR or whatever it is you want to call it? You would agree with that? Okay.
I think only on a like short-term basis, but my experience is if you talk a lot to people and a bit and a bit and a bit, so I think that the snappy thing's quite difficult.
One, two.
Yeah.
That kind of talking to people over some period of time is a bit more. Sorry, I was saying that the snappy, catchy thing is quite difficult.
Yes.
But a longer-term conversation isn't, because
Yes.
it's interesting and people
want
connect.
to talk about it.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I would completely agree with that. I think that's a slightly separate point, though. So I think on the one hand, you're saying that there's something Unitarians don't want to evangelise, but you're actually saying there's something quite complex about the nature of Unitarianism that makes it difficult to simplify and package up into a short message.
Because I do it. I think that is evangelising, because I do it with people who I think would
welcome coming to a Unitarian community, and I'm doing it because I think it would be nice to have them within my community. So
Yes.
I think it is, but it's
I'm not saying it's not evangelising. I'm just saying that there's the kind of a principle that might be against evangelising, and then there's the slightly complex nature of Unitarianism, which makes it difficult to evangelise about. Do you see what I mean? Sorry, there's the lady over there who's quite keen to say something.
I don't want to get too bogged down in definitions. I think the thing is that to many people, evangelising means a particular way of reaching out to convert people to a definite way of thinking, which is why Unitarians don't tend to like the term, because that's the opposite of what we stand for.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm using it, in speech marks. As I said, I'm not an expert on Unitarianism, but this was something that became apparent to me in the research that I did and the conversations I had, that actually generally it's something that many Unitarians might feel slightly hesitant about putting the word out and pushing hard. Okay, sorry.
I think with some of the other denominations, a lot of participants are convinced they have all the answers. With us, it's a bit more complicated.
Yeah.
So.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And they just, it's easy if you say, oh, we have all the answers, come on in, type of thing.
Yes.
So it's more difficult with us, more subtle.
Yes, I completely agree. It's like what this lady, Louise, at the front here was saying. It is subtle, and you're not trying to shove an ideology down people's throats. You're saying, we don't know, what do you think? But that's quite a complex message, perhaps, to get across.
Well, I was just going to add to that to say that I think there's also a sense, because everybody is sort of on their own path, that everybody might have a slightly different idea of what the message is, and not having that confidence that you are speaking, people don't want to speak for everybody.
Yes.
So that makes it a complex message.
Yeah, I think it's almost, in some ways, it's a branding issue, actually. And if you imagine a big company like Coca-Cola or whoever, if, different people were selling with different packets with a different name, with a different flavour, some might be fizzy, some might not be fizzy, it's all completely different. Is it actually still a drink? It actually makes it quite complicated. And I don't think we're going to solve that today, and I don't think it's actually something that you want to solve, because I think that's one of the things that, to me, seems so great about Unitarianism. But I think it's just being aware that there is that kind of difficulty there, perhaps.
There is a relevant point, which is, for example, I don't advertise Unitarianism. I talk about it critically. I tell people about it, but I do it in a critical way. It's not advertising, it's not marketing, it's just conversation.
Yes, I think I understand what you're trying to say, but I guess any conversation could be loosely termed marketing. And I think one of the things, like Louise said, actually people do want to talk about the issues behind Unitarianism, and it makes for really interesting conversations. And I think with social media and with PR, which is where you're perhaps getting coverage in the media, actually Unitarianism does lend itself very well to that. Perhaps it's not the kind of big brand and the big billboard adverts, but actually those kind of talking about issues does fit very well with Unitarianism. Okay, I need to move on now. So there's that question, do you want to do it at all? Well, I would say that there are opportunities to be gained by spreading the word. These could be income, potentially to support community projects that you're doing or to support your congregation. They could be opportunities to engage with people, to get more people involved and benefiting from your work. I would ask the question, do you have an obligation to spread the word, or at least give people an opportunity to find out about you? I mean, from the answers when I asked how did you find out about Unitarianism, there was a really broad range, but it struck me that it was quite by chance, and actually there could be loads of people out there who just haven't had that opportunity, haven't had that chance meeting or chance conversation, and they're not able to benefit from what I hope you all feel is the really positive experience that you guys have from Unitarianism. And, you know, I would put myself in that position. I didn't really understand what Unitarianism was until I was asked to give this talk. And actually, it sounds absolutely fascinating. It's something I'd like to learn a lot more about. So I would say that ultimately you have a choice, and this is your choice. It's not my choice. So you can go away from today and decide, actually, no, we don't want to do that. That's entirely up to you. But you can reach out and get more people involved, get more people understanding what you're doing, or you can accept your limitations and say, we just want to be who we are because we don't like doing that. We want people to come to us in this slightly more organic way. So I think that's a question for you to think about. And understanding what I do understand about Unitarianism, I imagine that there's going to be a scale of answers for that from different congregations. If you could move the slide on, please, James. Thank you. So from what I do understand, so from here, I think we'll assume that you do want to do communications, and I will talk to you about how you might approach that. So from what I do understand about Unitarianism, I've kind of identified 3 things that I think you might want to achieve by outreach or communications. So firstly, simply getting people to know what you're about, what you do, the whole concept of Unitarianism, so gaining understanding. Secondly, support for your work. So this could be for your community programs, for fundraising activities, any kind of support you need in order to flourish. Perhaps it could be fundraising from grant-making organisations as well, actually. And thirdly, participation. So getting people involved in some of the issues that you like to talk about, getting people to attend your services. It could be a very small piece of engagement, or it could be full-on engagement, but actually getting people to participate and be involved. Is there kind of broad agreement that they're the key things that outreach or communications would achieve? Good. Right, so coming down from the broad aims then, if you move on to the next slide. So just thinking about your strategic approach. So once you've answered the question that yes, you do want to do communications, I think it can be very easy to get caught up with feeling you just need to do it, you should just do it, and you go straight into doing it without actually thinking through in detail why you want to do it. Obviously, I've given those really broad aims on the previous slide, but I think you need to think about for every piece of outreach work that you do, for your particular congregation, what are you trying to achieve, and trying to be as specific about that as possible. So, you know, rather than just saying we want to engage people, actually, do you want to get people to attend services? Do you want people to just get involved in something really specific? Secondly, you need to think through your audiences in detail. So for any communication strategy, the audiences you want to reach should be absolutely at the heart of what you're doing. So you need to think about who these audiences are, what you want to say to them, what impact you want to have on them. So what do you want them to think? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? What do you want them to know? Who are these audiences? It can be quite tempting to just say the general public or people who live in my town, but actually that's really broad, and if you've got limited time and limited resources, it might be better to try and identify people you think might be more interested in Unitarianism or could potentially particularly benefit from it. So we'll come back to audiences a little bit later. Thirdly, how do you actually get your message out? So what activities can you do to spread the word? And again, we had some examples at the beginning of how you guys found out about Unitarianism, ranging from, you know, word of mouth to articles in newspapers and so on. That's the kind of meat of your strategy, if you like. So we'll be looking at that in a lot of detail. And finally, what does success look like? Obviously, you can only measure this if you've been really clear from the start about what your objectives are. But I think you need to think of ways in which you can measure success. And if it's something new that you're doing for the first time, you might not have targets, but you might want to create benchmarks so you can look at them in the future and see if actually, you know, you're just completely wasting your time. So just wanted to say a quick word about objectives. We will come back to objectives at the end. as I said, your objectives should be at the start of your strategy, but I often find that you almost need to do all the thinking and then you come back and revise those at the beginning. So I would start with having those kind of broad aims of understanding, support, engagement, and actually we'll come back to those and talk about making those SMART objectives, which might be something you're familiar with, a little bit later on. So, audiences. So, as I said, it can be really tempting to be really broad, but I think the more specific you are about your audiences, the more effective and the more creative your tactics are going to be. So, does anyone have any suggestions for how you might be able to narrow your audiences down?
Something we did as part of the Northern Unitarian Association, which is Stockton and Newcastle, we were looking to get some funding for a marketing company, market research company called MarketWise, to do a bit of work with us and talk to new members. And from that, we tried to identify what had brought people into the church and what sort of characteristics they had.
Oh, interesting.
And whereabouts, well, I suppose in a sense, whereabouts in the city we might be likely to find them.
Okay, and what did that research tell you?
I think one of the things is something the lady at the front said, which is that sometimes people come for the church when they've gone through a big change in their lives. Another, as we've seen, is chance. People who already have what I think you'd broadly call fairly liberal sensibilities, who find out about the church and decide it matches what they're after.
Yes, okay, brilliant. So, tell me a little bit more about that then. So if you were to define those audiences, was it based on where they lived, what age they were, what?
Partly where they lived, in the sense that if you know the city well, you know that there's places where people are perhaps more likely to be, areas like, well, in Newcastle it's places called Jesmond and Heaton, where you tend to find students, younger families and professionals.
Okay. So effectively more middle class in some ways.
That was something we talked about in some detail. We don't necessarily want to be a church for the middle class. So it's a bit of a balancing act. Do you go for the people who you think are definitely most likely to be interested in what you've got? What in my day job we'd call the low-hanging fruit?
Yes.
Or do you try to outreach to absolutely everybody?
Yes. No, that's an interesting one. I suppose I don't think it's necessarily a question of easy wins versus everybody, but there might be people that you want to reach because you think they're easy wins, or there might be people that you want to reach because you think they have the potential to benefit, or because it's an audience that's neglected currently in terms of Unitarianism and you feel that actually you kind of want to focus on those audiences. So there could be all sorts of reasons in your head. And has that helped you in terms of your outreach activity?
It has. We've done things like have stalls at the Newcastle Green Festival, because something we tried to do was work out where we might advertise most successfully. Places like the Green Festival, the city's libraries and arts venues were the sorts of places we thought people might be interested. We have added a couple of new members, partly through our participation in the Heritage Weekends, because our church is an Art Deco building. We're lucky to have that. So we take part in that, and sometimes when people come to the Heritage Weekends, they decide to visit the church afterwards.
Okay, brilliant. And sorry, did you want to add anything else?
Just wanted to say also, I don't want to make this all about us, but I'm quite happy to talk about the MarketWise event in more detail and share the findings if that's useful for people.
Yes, I think that might be something that either you could, I don't know, share afterwards via email or something, or
yes,
if
I'd
it's
be
something
happy
in
to
the
do.
breaks, perhaps people could have a quick chat with you as well. But that sounds really interesting. Does anyone else have any experience of narrowing down audiences and targeting audiences?
Yeah, the Nottingham congregation a while back had somebody who worked for a market research company, and they had access to the demographic details of the city. So they were able to take age, population, jobs, type of housing, etc., and use that to narrow their campaign.
Okay, and what sort of age or what characteristics did you decide to target?
Well, I wasn't actually doing it,
Okay.
but the person, because I'm not a member of Nottingham congregation.
Okay, you just...
I was talking to this chap. He's now
Someone else.
moved down south.
Okay.
But he
Yeah.
knew what he was looking for, so therefore he was able to use the company's database of how people were spread around the city and the surrounding areas
Yeah,
to decide this area needs, we could do retargeting this area.
yeah, yeah.
These roads probably aren't going to be good, a fruitful ground for us.
Yeah. So I would say that's really interesting. There's been some more market research. And again, I don't know if there's a way for that to be potentially shared, because I'm sure it would be interesting for everybody.
Sorry, can I just add something very quickly?
No
because
problem.
One of the things that I think is a point which people get slightly confused is that you can actually target an audience, and you can be quite specific about going for maybe somebody that's disillusioned with mainstream churches, etc. But that doesn't mean that you're trying to be exclusive, and that the inclusive nature is still there.
Yeah.
But it just means the fact that from a marketing point of view, you're just trying to concentrate that particular campaign on those type of people. Who comes through the door as a result? Of course you'd welcome everybody. So it's not that you are trying to say we are excluding other people, but just for that campaign you are specifically going for a group because you believe there are people out there that will that it will resonate with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. So, if you were promoting a Christmas fair or something, you might want to target families with young children, but actually that doesn't mean that you're not going to let in people who've seen the poster who aren't a family with young children. So I think that's a really good point, James. I think for me, narrowing down your audiences is good because it gives you ideas. So the examples that this lady over here was talking about, was it the Newcastle Green Festival, yeah. So actually it gave them the idea of going to that event because it makes you start thinking about these people, and rather than just being these faceless millions, actually they become people to you who might be, reading or watching certain media or attending certain events or having certain things happening in their life that's going to make them tune in to what you're doing. So I think that was a really good example. Thank you. So the sorts of things you could narrow down audiences by could be basic demographic things like the examples we've had. So people's age, gender, life stage, where they live, but also some of the things they might be interested in. So a couple of people mentioned funerals earlier on, and I know that you do alternative funeral and marriage ceremonies. So actually people who are in the market for that kind of thing. So if you had, for example, a green burial site, perhaps they're the sort of people you could speak to about having some message about your congregation in their magazine or newsletter. So I think just beginning to think about the audiences and thinking about those triggers is going to help you to be creative about ways to get your message out. And also remembering that you might have broad audiences that you feel you want to target as a congregation, but actually there might be specific audiences that you identify for really specific activities, so like the Christmas fair event that I mentioned. Okay, thank you. So as we were talking about earlier, I think communications are much more powerful if you can be really clear and consistent on what you're saying. And whilst that might be a bit of a struggle for Unitarianism across the board, to actually get really clear and consistent on what you want to say in terms of your own congregation or in terms of a particular programme or activity that you want to promote, having really clear messaging that you go back to and that you agree with everybody involved is really important. So what I would suggest is developing key messages, which is almost like a checklist of really short statements. So it could be really basic things like your web address or the time of your service, or it could be a kind of very clear statement of what your congregation is all about. So very basic messages, and they should be not even really sentences, like, less than a line of text, that you almost have as a checklist. So every time you do a press release or a leaflet, or you look at your website, you can actually say, have we got that content on there? And it's quite nice in the sense because it's also quite democratic, because you can get people to agree to those key messages, and then it might give you the opportunity to go off and do things without having to approve everything with everybody all the time. I don't know if people find that's an issue at all. I'm guessing it might be. Is that an issue?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So as well as those key messages, those short statements, you can also develop more detailed messaging about a particular activity or programme. So this would be kind of full paragraphs. So like your Christmas fair, for example, you could write a couple of paragraphs explaining exactly what's happening. And getting that messaging agreed then means you've got a basis to use for all sorts of communications. And I think it's always worth getting somebody externally to have a read and check that it makes sense, because when you're quite close to something, it's really easy to just do something that you take for granted people understand it, but they don't. So I think having someone to check it, and also just checking very basic things like typos and grammar's quite nice. Also thinking about a call to action. It's amazing how many leaflets or brochures or websites that I see, and there's not a clear call to action. You read all this information, but you're not being asked to do anything. You're not being told, if you want to find out more, this is how you follow up, or come to our service, or whatever the action is that you want people to take. It might just be that you want people to know or feel a certain way. It might not be that you want them to sign on the dotted line, but actually thinking for every piece of communications that you do, what's the result that you want for this? What's your call to action? And of course, contact details as well. And making sure that contact details that you put on are current, and people actually do check them, because I know particularly if you've got a lot of volunteers involved, which I'm guessing is probably the case, actually people have busy lives and jobs, etc. You might find email addresses aren't being checked, or answer phones aren't being responded to. So try to think about, actually, can we manage this? And maybe you can't manage to respond to emails and you just want to have a phone number. That's better than having an email address that people just ignore. So, okay. If you could move it on, James. So how do you get your message out? I've done this little diagram which looks at the sort of what I think are the 3 key ways in which you can get your message out, and I think it's quite useful to think of them in this context, because I think otherwise I think people can get too reliant on one form of getting their messages out. So first of all, your own channels, so things like your website, newsletter, etc. So that's stuff that you produce yourself. The downside of that is that you're almost preaching to the converted, really. So it's mainly for people who already know about you and are already interested in you. The upside is that you can say exactly what you want to say and have absolute control over it. The second, and I will give you some more examples of that in a moment, the second way of getting your message out is through bought external exposure. So advertising, stuff where you're basically paying to get your message out, though sometimes you can get stuff for free. But that's using other people's communications channels. So usually you've got pretty good control over what you're saying in that. The downside is it's often costs money and you may not have money. The third way is what I like to call earned external exposure. So this is when you're getting coverage in other people's channels, either by having something so interesting or so admirable that they want to talk about you, or they want to give you a platform to talk yourself. So it's much harder work, it's more difficult to control because you're not buying the space and it's not your own space, but it is more influential because it's being sent out by a third party. So people externally might be more willing to trust it, might be more interested for that reason. It also means that you can potentially reach huge numbers of people compared with your own website, which may not have that many visitors. So let's just talk through these in a little bit more detail now. So first of all, your own channels. So I've put some examples up there. I'll just read them in case anybody's not got a handout or whatever. So your website, newsletters, social media like Facebook and Twitter or other social media platforms, physical places like your notice board, your building, reception desk, a phone line. You might have an annual report or other publications that you put out. Does anyone else have any other examples of communications that they're doing that they own? Or has that covered everything?
Well, I suppose YouTube. The stuff that UK Unitarians, sorry,
YouTube, the stuff that UK Unitarian TV
Yes.
does, that's ours.
Yeah, great, brilliant. Another
And,
social media platform.
I mean, if anybody does podcasting as well, don't they? I think some people do, yeah.
One sort of old-fashioned thing that's not actually specified there that I do as chapel secretary is when we're hitting a sort of critical period in the church calendar like now, with Remembrance Sunday and we're on the run-up to Christmas, I'll just do a little flyer with the brief details of the services, just to leave in the pews or hand out if we have an open afternoon.
Great.
Yes, it's labour
So a kind of
intensive for me,
leaflet.
but it's not over-facing in way of giving someone an 8-page newsletter.
Yes.
You know, it's a sort of, oh, pleased to see you, have a look round, oh, and those are the forthcoming services.
Yeah.
It's simple, but we found it does...
Really effective.
I won't say really effective, but it can garner new faces at a subsequent service.
Yes, yeah. I think...
Sorry, and it's the thing I'm reacting to is it's more focused as well. It's very specific event.
I think that's a really good idea, and I probably should have put something on there to cover that. I think I did on the previous page, but those kind of short leaflets, actually, you know, we can get all fancy with Facebook and Twitter and, you know, all of that, and I think that's really important, but your basic leaflet or little note like that, I think is really, really effective, and I'm a big fan of printed materials. I often pick up bits, particularly if they look interesting.
What I would say, that's in addition to us having an very active Facebook account and a website that's updated. The other thing I would say, and I speak as a chapel secretary, and there is a tendency within our movement that the chapel secretary is responsible for everything you've got on that slide. Other chapel secretaries will understand. In addition to a couple of dozen other items, don't be afraid of finding a member of the congregation who may not want to be on a committee, but who is a whiz at social media or IT. We're lucky we have an IT professional, and he eats the website and Facebook for breakfast. You know, he's on it. He does happen to sit on our chapel committee. But what I would say is, look for the experts within your congregation. Yes, you need to monitor what they're doing. You need to brief them. But use that
I guess that
expertise.
comes back to having those messages, doesn't it, actually, that people can agree and then they can feel more confident using them. But yeah, I think that's a really important point.
Well, like I say, we do posters, we do leaflets, and we're active on the modern side as well. Yeah,
that's really good. I think you need that balance because particularly, you know, thinking about your audiences and who you might want to reach, but also I think, trying not to have everything sit with one person. Obviously, every congregation's different and you'll organise yourselves differently, but I think that's quite dangerous because that's probably quite an onerous task.
We have a similar thing with leaflets.
Yes.
Just something that happened yesterday. I was cleaning leaves up at our church in Bradford yesterday when a couple turned up, actually looking for the Quakers, which are semi-detached from us. But I was able to. They asked about Unitarianism, which I'd never heard of before, so I was able to take them into the church, show them round. But we also have some first-time visitors packs. So we were able to give some information out there, easy, at hand, on the desk, and they were able to go away with something positive.
And I think that's important, isn't it? Because they've made that step.
Personal contact.
And to have something, the personal contact is, you know, to be honest, actually, you could scrap everything and just do one-to-one, face-to-face. But unfortunately, you don't necessarily have time to do that. Some people might find it off-putting, I don't know, but the one-to-one is always going to be the best, I would say. There's another question back there. or comment?
Hi, it was just to add Meetup onto that list, that's all. We
Okay.
put stuff onto Meetup,
Yeah.
and it's kind of making a noise. I can't define it, but it's making a noise anyway.
Great, thank you.
Just to be on a slightly flippant note, we're often confused with the United Reformed Church.
Yes.
People say, aren't you the United Reformed Church?
Yeah.
And, so perhaps a big poster on the side of the church. We are not the United Reformed Church. Might get some interest.
Possibly. I think it would certainly amuse congregation members anyway, wouldn't it? Okay. So yeah, that's just a flavour. So obviously there's lots of other stuff, but hopefully you get the principle that that's stuff that you're controlling, but by its very nature, therefore, who you can push it out to might be slightly limited. If you could just flick it onto the next slide, please, James. So secondly, bought external exposure or advertising. So that could be advertising in the media. It could be paid search, which is paying to appear higher up on search engines, so if people put things into Google. It could be advertising with posters, so in libraries, doctor surgeries, community centres, those sorts of things. You could be paying for a leaflet drop, even if it's something that you do yourself. Obviously, you've got to pay to print and the time. Obviously, there's a little bit of crossover between these categories, but we don't need to worry about that. And finally, kind of cross-promotion. So the example I gave earlier on of promoting the funeral services via Green Burial magazine or whatever. So trying to think of other people who've got mutually shared interests and if you can do cross-promotion via them. So did anybody have anything to add or any comments on that?
Promoted posts on social media?
Yes, I'm going to come on to that. Yeah, that would be, I think that would be, that's kind of similar to paid search, I guess. Yeah, any kind of paid online promotion. And social media is an interesting one. We'll talk about that in a second because for the most part, I would say it's earned exposure, but actually there's more and more kind of paid opportunities, so adverts on Twitter, sponsored posts and things on Facebook. Yeah.
Sorry. I quite like the idea of a leaflet drop. I think it's very sort of understandable to everybody. But is there a sort of a general wisdom as to how effective leaflet drops are? I hear various comments made, and the general comment I hear is, don't bother. It's something I want to bother with.
Yeah.
You know, 10 people, 100 leaflets each, you've done quite a good coverage. Is there a sort of a perceived understanding of...
Yeah, it's known as direct marketing or direct mail. And obviously, we're all used to getting loads and loads of leaflets and things through the door. And I suppose just think about yourself as an individual, your response to getting all those leaflets and things through the door. Do you read all of them? Do a lot of them go straight in the bin? Probably a bit of a mix. Probably 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, they do go straight in the bin. But occasionally, something might catch your eye and you might think, oh, I'm quite interested in that. So I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, like the example that Ian gave, sorry, my eyes aren't great, that Ian gave a little bit earlier on about the basic little slip bit of paper. Actually, what I like about that kind of communication is it's very direct, and your call to action, therefore, is probably, hopefully, quite strong within that piece of communication. So I would absolutely say that leaflets are worthwhile, but you just have to accept that only 10% or 1% or 0.01% people might take action, and you've just got to accept that that's the case. And it might be quite a lot of legwork to print and deliver all those leaflets, and whereas if to get an article in a local newspaper or something, perhaps that would hold more sway and be seen by more people than just feeling like it's being lumped in with loads of junk mail. But I wouldn't rule it out. I would say have a go and see, and monitor the response. Make sure you find a way that people are, when they get in touch with you, that you can track that they've come through because of the leaflet. So whether it's kind of offering something for free or getting people to call a certain number or respond to a certain email address or attend a certain event, so you actually know if it's the leaflet that's made a difference. Otherwise it's all a bit nebulous. The other thing I would say is that it might be a bit disheartening if you have the 0.01% response, but actually how many people have seen that leaflet and read it and it's bubbling around somewhere in their brain, and it's something that they see something else 5 years later or whatever. It's that kind of nudge, and I think you'll probably notice this a lot with marketing more broadly. When a big blockbuster film comes out, you might see the adverts on the telly, you might hear something on a review show, you might notice an ad in the paper, you might see an interview with the actress in it or something. Suddenly you'll feel like that film's everywhere. So it's almost like this kind of drip, and you might feel that, I don't know, that it's maybe isn't completely effective on its own, but maybe it's that nudge that then when they walk past they go, oh, that was that place there was that leaflet about, and maybe then they'll read in the paper about some event or some community program that you're running and think, oh yeah, I've heard of them. And so yeah, don't necessarily discount it.
We're fortunate our chapel's in a sort of semi-rural location, and I try to get these leaflets printed off in order to do a leaflet drop prior to the run up to Christmas, because we have sort of carol service, Christmas Day service, and maybe towards Easter.
Yeah.
Partly on that drip idea.
Yes.
I think for things like a leaflet drop, if you're able to produce it in-house,
yes,
which I can because I run my own company, get half a dozen members, as was said, 50, 100 leaflets each.
It's actually
not
doable.
When I say hard work,
yeah,
it's an hour or two. You can always finish in the local pub, and do it on a night when you don't get the local free newspaper delivered.
I thought you were going to say on a night when it's not raining for a minute.
Try and do it.
Think about it intelligently.
On a Sunday night, Saturday, whatever, so that it hopefully lands on the doormat.
Yeah.
Separately to everything else.
Yes.
Personally, I would not think there was much value in, as it were, paying for direct marketing or to have it included in a local magazine or newspaper.
I completely
it will just
agree.
Get junked with everything else.
Yeah, I think that there's so much you can do on a wing and a prayer, and there's so much that I've done on a wing and a prayer in my career because I've mostly worked for charities. And actually, you say that you can print the leaflets yourself. Actually, you can print a leaflet on a piece of, normal A4 paper and cut it up into quarter squares if you want to. It doesn't have to be fancy or flashy, but it does have to be effective. You do have to think about what's going to pull people in, which is something I'm going to come on to more in a minute, actually, so I won't spoil that too much. But yeah, I think being effective and thinking about those horses for courses, local considerations, like you're saying, whether the local paper's not going to be there, but thinking about coming back to the audiences, who you want to reach, and choosing certain streets or being a bit more targeted. Otherwise, it potentially is a bit too unwieldy. Yeah. Sorry, could you? I couldn't catch that.
It's actually my day job rather than the Unitarian. But
sorry, what's your day job?
I've got my own businesses, but how can I phrase it? I'll send out 100,000 leaflets and the phone will ring off the hook and we can't cope with everything. So what I've found is more effective is sending 3, sending 1 and then the reminder and then the reminder, and it's more ingrained in people's minds. Okay. And, it's if you're posting them yourselves, brilliant. But if you're sending them out with a local paper, it can be as cheap as £10 per 1,000. So it's a really, really cheap, effective way. Whereas if you get another company to do it, it'll be £30, £35, and Raw Mail's £45. So if it's beating the streets, everybody doing it together, brilliant. But otherwise, you do still get a response with the local papers, and I've tried everything, and the old-fashioned way sometimes is the best.
Yeah,
but it has to have a call to action on it. You have to be, say that, there's an open day or a specific event, or put, stag points of exactly what you're offering.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's, I absolutely agree that sometimes the old-fashioned way is the best, and I think, like you were saying, it's partly about the method you use to get the message out, but it's as much about the message and, you know, what you're saying is interesting, it's reaching the right people, it's pulling people in, and it's understandable, because so often you get stuff and you're just like, yeah, sorry, what is that? And I think there is a real danger of that with Unitarianism, because it's perhaps a slightly complex concept for people who are new to it. So I think that's something you need to be really careful of, and not trying to say everything in one leaflet, perhaps just focusing on one thing.
Something we found useful based on MarketWise, is that people who are likely to be interested in the church are often also interested in voluntary work or involved in it. That's partly why we went to the Green Festival. But also, I don't know if everyone would have this in their area, but in Newcastle we have the Newcastle Council for Voluntary Service, which is basically... There
should be one in each region, I think, yeah.
It's basically the umbrella body for all voluntary and community sector organisations in an area, and ours does a weekly email bulletin. So if you can get yourself into something like that, or into the local interfaith council or churches council or whatever there is in the area, that can often be quite a good way of getting free advertising if they do email bulletins.
Absolutely, and I think all congregations would be eligible to join CVSs if they're not already members.
Just a comment from the interactive page from Wade Miller Knight. He says leaflet drop, standard yield is said to be 0.5%, and that's exactly what they got in Southend-on-Sea for their meditation leafleting. He goes on to say that Sunday church services are not the attractive first entry point for outsiders.
Yeah.
And he also goes on to say the distance between the doormat and the dustbin is 7 seconds. But I actually followed up with him and said, well, yes, but what price just one more congregant? And also, I like old school media as well, because old school media usually has the new media addresses on it, and therefore old potentially brings new. So just my opinion there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that, you know, like I said, that is true. A lot of direct mail's just going to get dumped straight away. But have you planted that seed in people's heads? And also, I think thinking about the 0.5% figure he quoted. Actually, if you can double or triple or times by 10 the effectiveness of that 0.5% by making your draw and your message really, really strong, you know, actually you're going to get a much greater yield. So I think that shows how important it is to focus on the quality as well as the means of getting it out there. Yes.
Two quick reactions to things you said, and they're roughly commented on by other people. First of all, I and most of the people, most of my friends in my demographic will go straight from the door to the dustbin with mail that's not addressed directly to me. Having said that, I have to read it to check that it's not addressed to me. And that leads me on to the other thing which I'm really interested by, and I'm really delighted to hear you talking about, which is the drip thing, because I'm always saying, you know, members of our congregation are saying, oh, well, you know, such and such a thing, that last time we did that nobody came in, like nobody comes in from weddings. Is there a statistic, theory or science to how many times people need to hear something that they think is a good idea, obviously because they're not going to otherwise, before they actually do something?
I'm sure there is. I couldn't.
It's 7.
Couldn't quote it. 7.
7 is the deemed wisdom.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's a huge variation on that, but the deemed wisdom is that once people have seen things 7 times, it will stick in their head. It will start sticking in there.
So, like the example I gave of a film coming out, actually you're potentially being exposed to it at different points before it, you know, it suddenly clicks. But, you know, if it's your favourite actor and, you know, and it's a sequel to something that you've really enjoyed before, you might be that much more switched onto it. Whereas if it's something you've never ever heard of, you might take a lot more convincing. So obviously there's huge variation. Right, any comments before I move on to the next slide? That's been a really interesting one, hasn't it? Okay. The third way of getting your exposure out there, as I said, is through earned exposure, which I think is where it gets really interesting. So this is where you are having something you're saying something that's so interesting that people want to help you spread the word, they want to talk about it. Or it might be where you've done something so amazing that other people are starting to talk about you. So the kind of things that this could include could be a column in your local newspaper, so it could be talking about local issues or national issues at a local level. A similar thing, a feature article in a magazine. It could be a spokesperson from your congregation being interviewed in the media. It could be a speaking opportunity at an event. On social media, it could be something that's being shared on people's Facebook pages. So, if you've got a jumble sale coming up, or I don't know what kind of events you might run, perhaps you can tell me, but, things that people like, there's, something really exciting, there's going to be Santa at the church hall or whatever, stuff that people actually want to start talking about themselves. Word of mouth is something that we've mentioned a few times today. I would say that that's really, really important, and thinking about how your congregation talks about what you do and having that conversation, I guess, within your congregation about how they can share information, and whether it's just passing on the basic leaflets that Ian was talking about or whether it's just talking. And then online, so I talked earlier about SEO, which stands for Search Engine Optimization. So things like search terms that people who might be investigating church alternatives to traditional church might be using that might pull people to your sites. I don't know what the hot terms are, but that might be something it's worth discussing. So making sure that you're using that terminology on your website in anything that you do online, so that people are going to end up coming to you rather than going somewhere else. And also thinking about content that you can produce. So as well as columns in local newspapers, you can actually do similar editorial pieces online. So if you had a blog on your website or on a blogging platform like WordPress, perhaps talking about, I don't know, alternative funerals, euthanasia, same-sex marriage, any of the sort of issues that are really relevant in Unitarianism, thinking about that content and those issues and talking about those as a way to pull people in. Has anyone done anything like this? Can anyone share any experiences that they feel have worked?
Indirectly, because just reading that reminded me I need to make sure that we actually include our local newspaper and local magazines on our newsletter email distribution list, because it's something that just occurred to me. But just to share the experience of a friend of mine who runs a local swimming club, junior swimming club.
Yeah.
They have a very active website, and it's updated with results from galas, because they have swimming competitions nearly every week. And they found that our local newspaper basically started cutting and pasting whole chunks of the competition reports for the following week's newspaper.
Yeah.
They didn't mind, but what it meant was that they were getting a lot of publicity, almost as though they had a very effective press officer.
Yes.
And it turned out, because they did speak to the newspaper to say, we don't mind, but, we're just a bit surprised that you're copying from our website. And what they realised was that journalists are inherently lazy.
Yes.
And
we'll come on to this.
What it meant was, because somebody within their group was happy on a Monday to update the website with the latest competition results and maybe post a couple of recent photos, the local journalist was in the habit
just
on a Tuesday morning having a look what was new.
Yeah.
And, okay, some weeks there might only be a couple of sentences. The other week it might be a quarter-page piece in the sports section of the local paper.
Yeah.
And it did actually pay off, because over a few months they found that they got perhaps half a dozen new members.
Oh, okay.
So, again, it's a case of, if you have got a website or a blog, keep it up to date.
Yes.
And if you can point the local newspaper at it, you might find that the journalist will do your job for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think whilst it's probably true that a lot of journalists are lazy, I think the other issue that you're seeing, particularly in regional media, is that their budgets are just being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, particularly print media. And a lot of, as I said, we'll come on to this a bit this afternoon when we talk about working with the media, a lot of papers are on skeleton staff, and so it's partly laziness, but actually they just don't have much time, or many people. So if you can, the job of a good press officer is to sort of do half of the journalist's job for them, to just make it too tempting for them not to run with that story because it's, easy.
Write as well.
Pardon?
And write as well. Write it as though it was a newspaper article and it just gets reprinted.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in this day and age, again, we're going to talk about press releases this afternoon, but if you've got that content, actually thinking, what are all the ways I can use this content? Because it might feel like quite a big task sometimes to write a press release, but actually if you can use that for a press release, the basis for a leaflet, a newsletter, for a blog, for content on your website, if you're promoting it through social media, suddenly just by having that little bit of content and using all those potential channels, it's giving you more and more opportunities to reach people. So that's a really nice example. Thank you. Got the
a couple of things, but I don't know how effective some of them are. Okay. So I think with we do often, all of us, link in with national stuff. Yeah. So Heritage Open Day is a big thing, and I used to be an occasional blogger with them. Okay. And then I went down to London. They used to, lovely people running it, and they used to have all the bloggers down once a year. So then you used to network with those people, and one of the chaps did a radio show in Crewe, which is 15 miles from Newcastle under Lyme, and so he then invited me on there. So it was kind of that, links within links. Yes. And there's things like Macmillan coffee mornings and big lunches. So and then you don't have to do the advertising. No. So then actually you just have to put on an event, and all the advertising. And I think for Heritage Open Day, there are Heritage Open Day groupies. And, they don't come to you because they just come to you because you're close and they've never seen it before. Yes. So I think that's really good.
So and thinking of all those kind of cross-promotional opportunities, and I guess anything that you're tapping into, like the Macmillan Coffee Mornings, actually making sure, are we getting all the exposure that they can give us, and just making sure everything's joined up. And making sure, and I think for Heritage Open Day, we always give people a cup of tea, we always give them a nice piece of cake, and they go, a lot of places we don't get this. So you can't, it's not about giving them religion, it's about giving them a good experience, isn't it? Yeah. And then the sort of talking to people, I used to go to a reflexologist, and we just, because it's alternative health, then we just used to talk about spirituality again and again and again. So at some point she started coming, and then her daughter started coming, and then her mother started coming. So I think that what I was saying, about evangelising, I think I was, but it was much more subtle, and it was having a conversation. Yes. And I think it's just about starting that conversation with somebody who you think is a searcher, because I think that is the demographic we look at quite often, is searchers. But they don't sort of go, oh, hello, I'm a searcher. They don't kind of, they're spread across the population. Well, it's true, but I guess, it's interesting that you use the phrase a searcher. I really like that. And what I was saying earlier about actually this kind of new digital age of social media and the web, how that kind of fits, in my mind, in some ways with Unitarianism, and it's probably because there are searchers out there literally searching, and I suppose there's probably quite a big piece of work that could be done actually, which we probably won't get onto today, but in terms of those searchers, what search terms are they using? Because not all of that happens online, and I think you have to be careful not to exclude people who aren't online, particularly older people may not be online as much, but I guess it's going more and more that way. So actually getting it behind that, I think, would be really important.
Well, if you search Tim Berners-Lee, who's a UU in America, and he's British born, and the internet, and it's a fascinating article about how he thinks Unitarianism and the internet have very close connections. Fabulous article.
I'll take a note of that. Sorry.
Another way of getting information out and talking about newspapers, of course, is letters, the letters page.
Yes.
If there's a particular issue that's relevant, it's quite a good idea to get a letter out that sort of gives the content and the information that's...
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And I think in national papers, it's quite hard to get a letter printed, but in local papers, they're hungry for that. And, you know, think about that in its broadest sense as well, not just letters being sent to the local paper, but also online news stories. You can comment on the bottom of them quite often, which you can just do until there's too many comments and you're not allowed to comment anymore because everyone's got too irate. But yeah, you can usually just go and do that. Also phone-ins, there's probably like phone-in radio programmes in your local area. They're probably desperate for that phone to ring, so that, you know, there are real opportunities out there. For me, the letters to the local papers, that's something that you can turn around, you still need to turn around fairly quickly, but obviously anything that's happening in social media or online or on broadcast, you've got to turn it around really quickly. So I think there's also a bit of work to be done there in terms of making sure that as a congregation you're clear on your key messages, but also that you've identified spokespeople and the processes that you might use to make that happen. Because, you know, if there's a radio phone-in show that's on for an hour, by the time you thought about it, it will be over. So yeah, thinking about that. Thank you. That's a good example.
If you're going to have a column in a local newspaper, it has to be from an authoritative person. In the 1980s, I had a column in a local free rag, and I wasn't an authoritative person, so it didn't work. People didn't like what I was writing, and it didn't, you know, for one reason or another, it didn't represent them. I wasn't trying to represent them, but I did in passing, and they didn't like it. So it needs to be from a pastor or a minister or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and I think maybe that's something you could all think about in terms of your congregation and whether, you know, you need to feel kind of confident, I suppose, in going ahead with something like that. I know what you mean about being authoritative, but if you forget about a regular column for a second and you think about an article in the voice of somebody, you know, what about somebody who joined the congregation 2 years ago and is talking about their personal journey of becoming a Unitarian? Actually, they are an authority on their own personal journey, and that might be quite interesting. So perhaps the word column is a little bit scary, but actually if you think about that first-hand experience representing the media, maybe that kind of opens it up a bit.
I think it's similar to the speaking opportunity you mentioned. A couple of years ago, my minister at the time got us a spot in a local same-sex wedding fair on Canal Street. So me and another lady from my congregation pretended to get married, and she married us then. And I think that drew in certainly some bookings for weddings at the chapel, and I think definitely raised the profile of what we were doing.
Yeah, that's a really nice example. So I guess for the events, sort of thinking outside of the box a bit and coming back to, you know, we were talking about audiences and working out who they are and the kind of people you want to reach and what motivates them and makes them tick, and thinking about those kind of events and ways to engage in the broadest sense. So, okay, it might not be a local conference for people looking for alternative religion or churches, but it might be a local voluntary sector or weddings event, which I think, you know, would be highly relevant. Thank you, it's a good example. Anybody else? Shall I?
Just quickly, because I know you probably want to move on, but just going back to that thing about if you're sending out press releases and things. At the moment, I'm the editor of the Unitarian, which is one of the 2 national publications that we produce. And the laziness thing, it's not so much the lazy, I mean, you just don't have that much time.
Yes,
so
that's what I was defending.
And so I sometimes end up printing stuff just because it's been sent to me in the format that I can just copy and paste it straight in. The minute I have to work with something, so if somebody puts their text in the body of an email, and when you copy that across, it shoots all over the place. You know, it's lost. So that might be a more interesting story but it's not going to get in there because it's taking me I've got to do too much with it.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's laziness.
That's be interesting to have your perspective later on, actually, when we talk about working with the media. So, okay. Right, so if we could just move on to the next slide, please, James. Thank you. So hopefully one of the things that's coming across in everything that we've talked about so far is that whether you're developing content and messages to communicate via your own channels, via advertising or via earned exposure, everything that you're doing has to be relevant to the people that you're trying to reach. It has to be interesting. It can't just be from your perspective. You can't think, oh, we need more younger members of our congregation because our congregation is quite elderly, and therefore you're going to say, we need more younger members, we're all really elderly. Is that going to be the message that's going to draw young people in? So, I don't know. So, you know, what's in it for me is what people are unconsciously thinking. So you've got to pull people in, you've got to create that magnet, whether it's Father of Christmas at the Christmas fair, whether it's the opportunity to come on an activities weekend in Derbyshire or whatever it might be. So thinking about hopefully some of the things you'd like to promote and some of the target audiences you want to reach have been flitting through your heads while we've been talking. Could you just sort of think for a moment about something you would like to promote and what you might say to your target audience to interest them? And perhaps I can have a couple of examples to talk through.
Silence.
So it might be something quite specific, like a specific event, or it might be a more broad message about your congregation. Yeah.
I don't know whether this is relevant really, but recently in our church, not every month, but once every couple of months, been running a music and folk evening.
Okay.
With people that I know outside the congregation, friends, and advertised it, given handout slips of paper, pieces of paper to, but also including the congregation. So there's a connection between both, but not specifically targeting the Unitarian aspect, but sharing the building, sharing our music together and a social evening together. At the moment, it's just pondering in my head to do something in between Christmas and New Year, which is always the quiet time of in the in-between. And so I'd like to go ahead with that. And perhaps today may give me some more ideas how to expand on it.
Sure. And what's the sort of objective? Is it just to enjoy music with people, or is it a means to kind of tell people more about Unitarianism, or both?
Yes, without actually telling them.
Okay.
So that they can experience the building, the people. Because there's always to me, there's always this problem, the word church.
I was talking about someone with this earlier, actually.
We have had great debates about this.
Yeah.
Whether we're a centre, whether we're something different. But we always come back to the word church. And it does put off quite a lot of people because they think then of a fundamentalist Christian group of people.
Yeah.
Do they want to be involved at all in something like that? But if they experience the building and the people are just ordinary people like they are, that have a spiritual dimension to their lives, then maybe we hope that one or two will come to other things too and want to come.
And with the word church, do you think that there's other people from other congregations who might counter what you've just said and who very much feel that they are a church and they would like to retain that word? out of interest?
We did have a great debate. We did come out with a statement eventually. A church where freedom of thought matters.
Yeah.
To underpin Bradford Unitarians, which doesn't really mean anything to people who have not heard about Unitarianism.
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, I can understand that. Okay. That was just out of interest. Thank you. So you were using, just to finish on that point, I know we've got to go to coffee in a minute, you're actually using the music evening. That's your kind of magnet,
yes,
drawing people in. And do you feel that the kind of people who might be interested in that sort of music might be more likely to be interested in Unitarianism, potentially?
Yes, I think so, rather than trying to take the old world and say, come to us with something to offer.
Yeah.
Because music is part of our spiritual dimension.
Yeah.
And we also have our poetry read and things like that. So I think people who are interested in that, they may say to themselves, oh, I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual.
Yeah.
And I would say, oh yes you are, but you haven't discovered it yet.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a really, really good example actually. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, we're doing a letting go service to sort of promote healing and invite people to come who've had a trauma or a bereavement or a breakup, or that's attracting people from outside. So
okay, and again, a similar question to you really is the objective of that to help people in that way, or to bring them into Unitarianism, or both?
Absolutely both, yeah.
Both, okay, great. And I think that, again, is another really good example. We talked a little bit earlier about the kind of triggers that brought people to Unitarianism, and it sounds like that would fit that really well. Okay, so I'll just, no more questions for a second, I'll just finish going through this. So I think thinking about those magnets and what's in it for you. Also, I think a term you might have heard in marketing, it's talking about features and benefits. So a feature is, so for example, if there was a pen salesman who was trying to sell you a magic pen that never runs out, that would be the feature of the pen, it never runs out. But the benefit to you would be you'll never need to buy another pen again. And I won't talk about that in detail, but I think to try and think about everything that you're saying, to turn it on its head and work out how does that benefit the other person. Also using facts and statistics to support what you're doing, quotes and case studies. We talked about the example of someone who'd become part of a Unitarian congregation. I think that could be really powerful, and we're going to look at case studies a bit more this afternoon. And I think always coming back to that external perspective, so like with the example I gave about the elderly congregation, and how you actually want to present that to the audience you want to reach. So at the beginning of talking about having a strategy, we talked about objectives. So just coming back to these now, I just wanted to show you a couple of examples of objectives that you could consider. So your objectives should be, and I hate this acronym, but I do use it. Have you heard of SMART? So specific, measurable, action-based, realistic, time-bound. Just a kind of useful way to check in your head that it's not a really nebulous, vague objective. So an example might be secure a monthly column in the local paper which talks about the moral perspective addressed in a sermon. I don't know if you use the term sermon actually. Yes. You do? Okay. In relation to a local issue, encouraging 5 new people each month to email, phone, visit the web page about attending services. So, the details of that you might want to change yourselves, but it's just an example. Second example, produce an eye-catching poster highlighting activity for families at an upcoming Christmas fair to increase attendance by 25% compared with last year. So hopefully there's just a couple of examples there of how you can be a little bit more specific about either your broad communications work that you want to do, or the specific communications that you're doing about particular programs or activities, just so you can start measuring, if you do that leaflet drop, if it actually has an impact. And like I said, there's always going to be that kind of unseen impact. There's going to be that awareness, which is very difficult to know about unless you have loads of money to go out and survey people, whether they saw that article in the local paper or whatever. But there are ways to start measuring your communications activity, which we will come back to that a little bit later as well. So just to sort of summarise for this morning then, just if anybody had any final questions on what we've discussed so far, or any comments. Yes.
Just to comment that because at Bradford we are a small congregation, we tend to take initiatives upon ourselves.
Yeah.
I think it's probably obvious that it's better to work with 2 or 3 other people. What's your feeling about that?
Sorry, so you mean when you take on initiatives by yourselves, you mean like an individual within the congregation will just do the newsletter or whatever?
If I decide, which I have done of my own initiative, to send an email to the local paper to get something in to advertise something. But there's other things going on.
Yes.
All these other things we've been talking about. So it would be easier to work with a group of people who are interested in getting outreach, getting the message out.
Yes.
So would you advocate that? Would you say that that's the best thing to do?
Yeah.
Work with a small group of people within the congregation that's really interested.
Yes, no, I completely agree. I think if they exist, and you know, you've got to work in the real world, haven't you, and do what you can, and I think generally it's better to do something than nothing. But actually, if you can have those conversations, because I mean, I know that it's if you think about things on your own individually, actually it's quite easy to have blind spots, isn't it? And whereas if you're actually discussing it with people, you can be much more creative and bring in lots of perspective. So I definitely think that's a good idea. Also, I think there's an issue around if you're using social media newsletters, different forms of communication. Actually, if you're just all going off doing things, you might get to the point where you're actually saying quite different things. And that could be problematic. And I think for me, that's something that's really interesting from what I've learnt so far about Unitarianism, is actually all the congregations across the country are going off saying things and doing different things. And it's difficult because that's sort of part of what it is. But I don't know if there's kind of broad things that you agree upon, and if there's ways in which the kind of local congregations could be supported at a national level. I suppose to some extent that's what today is about, but whether there would be systems or templates or documents that would help that to happen. But certainly at a local level, I would say collaboration and working together is always a good thing. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, everybody. So I think we'll have a little coffee break now, and then we'll come back and we'll start talking in more detail about your own personal strategies. Thank you.
Smart. What was that
Just
again?
hang a second. How long should we give people? How long should
lunch is at 1, isn't it?
do you want to be 1:15? Is that too? That's not too long, is it?
I think that's fine, yeah. Okay. So back by about 10:15. 11.
Smart. What was smart again?
Oh, specific.
Oh, specific. I got the wrong from the first word.
Yeah.
Specific.
Measurable. Action-based. Realistic.
We're going to stop streaming now, and because we think that the stuff after coffee is going to be less suitable for streaming. But we will post, we'll definitely be on at 5, and if there's more stuff that we think we can show during the day, then we will post it on the Uni-coms website. Thank you very much for listening.